welcome to this revision guide on writing to persuade. I'm going to give you 4 top tips to help you make your writing as persuasive as it can possibly be. Okay, top tips. Number 1, use persuasive language. Top tip number 2 is to use your sentence structures for impact. Top tip number 3, build to a climax. And then finally, top tip number 4, tell an emotive story. Okay, we'll have a look at what I mean by each of these things, and we'll look at it with reference to a different example exam question. Okay, let's look first of all then at the obvious one, persuasive language, and our exam question is this: write to a celebrity to persuade them to join a charity to end world poverty. Now, when I think of celebrities, there are only 2 people who come in my mind, and it's important to have an idea of who you're writing to. 2 people who come to my mind are, of course, the Chuckle Brothers. So that's who I'm going to write to. And here's the beginning of my letter. Dear Paul and Barry, and it's important to write it as a letter if you ask to. Dear Paul and Barry, give me your money. The people of Africa are starving, desperate and dying. How can you watch the children starve? How can you sleep at night in your warm, soft bed? You are respected comedians and actors. Earn that respect and help to save a life. Persuasive stuff, right? Okay, let's first of all just break down the language that I've used. So we started right here with the word give, and the word give is an imperative verb. It's a verb that gives an instruction, and you know it's an imperative verb because it comes right at the beginning of the sentence, and it shows that I'm telling them what to do. They've got no choice. They've got to do exactly as I tell them. It's a bit aggressive, but it's quite a nice persuasive technique. Okay, moving on from there, have a look at this. The people of Africa are starving, desperate and dying. 3 words to describe the people of Africa. We call it the rule of 3 because it allows you to build. Listen again: starving, desperate, dying. I can build through those words. It's much more persuasive, so don't use 1 word when 3 will do. That's the rule of 3. Another technique I've used here, which should be familiar to most of you, is the rhetorical question. How can you watch the children starve? Yeah, so you ask a question even though you know there's no real answer to it. And then the next rhetorical question I've used here: how can you sleep at night in your warm, soft bed? I've also included this as an example of emotive language. So that's language which is tugging at the reader's heartstrings. It's making them, this time it's kind of a bit of a guilt trip, isn't it? How can you sleep at night in your warm, soft bed? And the final persuasive technique I'm going to identify from this extract is down here with the use of the word you, and that's a direct appeal to my reader. I call them Paul and Barry at the top, but then I've used the word you throughout, so it's so that they know I'm talking to them directly. They can't forget, they can't ignore, and that's really important. So there's 5 features of persuasive language there that should be really helpful in your writing, but that is not everything in persuasive writing, and don't forget it. So let's move on to top tip number 2, and we're going to look at sentences, sentence structures for impact here. Another exam question. This time we've got: write the text for an advert which persuades young men to buy a car. Well, there's only one type of car every young man wants, and it is of course the blue Reliant Robin. So a bit of a 3-wheeler here. Let's have a look at my text for their advert. Your life is hopeless, drab, boring. Why do you bother carrying on? There is only one thing which can save you now. A Robin Reliant, blue, beautiful. I'm waiting for the people from Reliant to phone me, but while we do that, let's have a look at the sentences for impact. So what you'll notice here is I've used a lot of short sentences. Now I have to demonstrate in the whole piece that I can use longer sentences, that I know where commas and semicolons go as well. But in the moment where I'm most appealing, where I'm most passionate, I find it's really helpful to break down into these short sentences. So your life is hopeless, nice short sentences, but then look at these: drab, boring, 1-word sentences. Mixed up with some slightly longer but still short ones again down at the end. A Robin Reliant, blue, beautiful. You can hear the power there. You can hear the way it slows down and emphasises those words. So a really, really useful technique to add a bit of passion, a bit of flair to your writing is short sentences for impact. Okay, that's top tip number 2. Top tip number 3 is build to a climax. And if you watch my video on structuring and paragraphing, this slide's going to look awfully familiar, but go with me because it's the same principle. So we're looking at persuade a friend to give up binge drinking. I've planned my work and I've got a few ideas. So I'm going to talk about health issues. I'm going to talk about the fact that it's antisocial to binge drink. I'm going to talk about the expense. I'm going to talk about the fact that it's addictive. I'm going to talk about the hangover it can give you. So 5 ideas that I'm going to talk about in the whole piece. But actually what I've got to do is make sure that I finish on the most important. So I'm going to start with my weakest argument and build through to the biggest idea that I've got to talk about, because that's going to help give my work a climax. So here we go, reshuffle, and we're going to start with the hangover because it's not that bad really. We've got the expense, building through to the fact it's antisocial, so it's not just expensive for the individual but for society, and from there we can go back to the individual and talk about how you might get addicted, and this addiction will of course lead to long-term health problems and ultimately your death. So we're building up to that idea of death and giving all the other reasons first so we can finish on a high. Build to a climax, top tip number 3. And finally, top tip number 4, tell an emotive story. And this is my favourite. I think it really helps to lift writing above the average. So, new exam task, persuade your head teacher to give you 2 weeks off to go on a talent contest. I feel like I'm stuck in between them. Okay, so, little emotive story from my piece to my head teacher to ask for the 2 weeks off for the talent contest. Here we go. Imagine, if you will, a little boy named Bobby. Bobby was in year 9. He was a talented boy. He had the opportunity to be a star. But Bobby never took that opportunity. He stayed in school and learned maths instead. Bobby died, sad and alone, because he learned maths instead of pursuing his dreams. Now imagine this same little boy, if his head teacher let him go. And then, of course, you go on to tell the opposite if the head teacher made the different choice. See what I've done here? I've made up this little guy called Bobby, and I've let the head teacher, or whoever I'm writing to, see the consequences of their decision. So I've started with what happens if they make the wrong decision. I've given a bit of detail, all that emotive language, tugging at the heartstrings again. And then I'm going to go on to tell them what happens if they make the right decision. And look, a few key words here. I'd always start it with these words. Imagine, if you will, and then explain who you're imagining, because it invites the reader into your world, the world of your imagination, and it lets them realise that actually there's a reality here, that their decision is going to have a real impact on a real person, even though you've made that person up. It's just quite a nice little trick, and it adds a bit of colour to what you're writing. Okay, so that's persuasion. 4 top tips. Number 1, persuasive language. Number 2, sentences for impact, particularly short ones. Top tip number 3 was build to a climax, save your best point till last. And finally, top tip number 4, imagine, if you will. Tell me that little emotive story. Thank you for watching.